3, 2, 1. So, Professor Martin Green OBE, you are the CEO of Care England, and it is an absolutely immense pleasure to welcome you to the Care Home Show.
Thanks, Simon.
Fantastic to have you here. So Martin, tell me, where did your journey in the care sector, where did that all begin?
Well, it started out doing sociology and social research, my first degree, and I got a lot of interest in the issues around social care and also around poverty and deprivation. Mm-hmm. My very first job was with a group called Gingerbread, which is a single parents charity, and then I graduated to working in a housing department, and then later on I became very involved in older people's care, working with age concern, and so that really gave me a big interest in the sector, and also it gave me a really good understanding of how important, if you get services right, they can transform lives.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, no, I couldn't agree with that more. And that was, so you went from Age UK and there was another job in between then and then Care England, wasn't
yes,
there?
I was Chief Executive of Counsel and Care, which was a charity for older people, and we did a lot of work on policy, and also we did a lot of operational guides. Many of them were in residential care, so it was things like what to look for in a good care home, and so we were doing quite a lot of that sort of work, and that really interested me as well. And it also gave me an opportunity to go out and see a lot of care homes and also other care services. I connected with the people who lived in care, I connected with their relatives, and I also connected with the fantastic people who work in care services.
Got you. So you were the obvious choice when for the role for the CEO for Care England came up then. So
well, I don't know if I was the obvious choice, but I was really pleased when I was given the opportunity.
Oh, great. And so why, on some level, you've kind of answered the question a little bit there already, but why is what you do so important to you personally?
Well, I really have seen the impact that care services have on people's lives. You know, I had this situation where when my mother died, my father went into a brilliant care home, and it really made a difference to him, but it also made a difference to my brother and I, because we didn't have any worry about him being looked after. So I've seen the really big impact that care services can make, and I've really seen as well how sometimes people who are leading very grey lives in their own homes are suddenly transformed when they go into good care services, and they connect with people, they make new friendships, and this is another chapter in their life.
It's amazing, isn't it? And then that what you've just explained there just flies in the face of the kind of the general consensus of what a care home's all about. I've seen it happen so many different times with people within my family, people within my friends' families, and then people within kind of services that we've been involved in from a professional perspective. And it's wonderful to see that, as you say, it's adding a whole new chapter to somebody's life. So.
Yeah, and I think the problem that we do face is that the media has one view, and of course when you've never had a contact with a care service, your only frame of reference is what you see on television or what you read in newspapers. And sadly in this country there is no such thing as good news. So they never show a good news story about social care, only a bad news story.
You can't sell newspapers with good news stories, unfortunately. It's all part of the business model, isn't it? And it's such a shame though when so much, I mean, we get the benefit of getting to see so much positive, great work and energy going into the sector. So to have it all unnecessarily and often incorrectly slandered in newspapers, it's something I know that we're both very passionate about, trying to redress the balance on some level. So
yeah, and I think one of the challenges we have though is there's lots of very positive publicity about the NHS. So if you look now at the moment, there are so many programmes. You know, we've got Inside the Ambulance, 24 Hours in A&E, GPs Behind Closed Doors, Emma Willis Delivers Babies, One Born Every Minute. These are all programmes which present positive images of the NHS, and what we need are some of the people in the media to start delivering some positive images around care. There have been a couple of attempts, and the care home for 5-year-olds on Channel 4 was a really good example of that, but we need lots more of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. There was the restaurant that makes mistakes as well. I thoroughly enjoyed that. That was
great.
It was I think it gave if you look at the kind of the public perception, I think it gave kind of a more kind of honest understanding of people living in dementia and what that means for them. So, I think we could probably do an episode just on the public perception and the kind of media portrayal of the care sector. But so maybe we'll pick that one up in more detail another day. But where do you personally get your passion from?
Well, I think it comes from my family. You know, we've always been people who threw ourselves into everything that we do. And I think I was lucky to be in a family where we always saw everything as in terms of the glass being half full rather than half empty. And my father particularly used to say to us, if you want something doing, don't wait for somebody else to do it. So I think, you know, I was very lucky to be brought up in that sort of environment.
Got you. And you can see that that's something that something that you embody in everything that you do, Martin. So it's great to see, and it's amazing that amazingly important. Sorry, I should say the lessons that we learn from our family and from our loved ones. So yeah, it's good to see that you're kind of still living the family values as such. Tell me about your work at Care England, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on there. Explain, I'm sure the audience will understand kind of on some level, but give us a real flavour for what that looks like.
Well, I think one of the things we are trying to do is we're trying to get a better environment in which people can deliver care. Mm-hmm. So we're spending a lot of our time at the moment on issues which are really important to the sector, such as workforce. Obviously, funding is another big issue. We're doing quite a lot of work on the new bill, in whatever shape it may be, but we've been promised there will be a new bill. So we're trying to get people to understand how important social care is. We're also very conscious that it's not only important in forms of transforming lives of the people it supports, but they're also very important parts of local economies, care services. You know, we employ lots of people, they live locally, they spend money locally, and too often care is always seen as a burden on society and the exchequer, and actually it's a contributor. And so I see so many people who have had very difficult times and their lives have been transformed by the intervention of care workers. So we've been trying to get that message across. So it's a very broad agenda, but it's one that we feel we have to make sure that those key messages are put into critical decision makers, but also to the general public. I also think we've got a real job getting the care sector itself to be more confident and to recognise what a fantastic job that it does. And so we're trying to also remind people that what they do is really amazing and they need to be telling people about it.
I couldn't agree more. We were talking about this just before we got onto camera, but you said this year's conference is largely focused on the workforce. That must be a really important and probably quite exciting piece of work for you to be getting involved in.
Yes, it is. I mean, our conferences are really great because it brings together a lot of people who work in the sector with people who are suppliers to the sector, but also we always have a really good lineup of speakers, and this year's no exception. So what we're hoping to do is focus on the positives. And what I've noticed as well, in the last 3 years, we have done really positive conferences. So yes, there's always the issues around funding, for example, but if you give people the opportunity to be creative and to think outside the box and to think about the future rather than the challenges of now, I think that really gives people an understanding that we're in a sector that can make a difference and also that has a really good future if we craft it ourselves, because I don't believe the government necessarily is going to come with all the solutions. We've got to make sure the solutions come from the sector.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think one of the things that I've seen is there are other events and they turn into whinge fests, and it seems it's almost like some of them just seem to it's like a negative reinforcement of this narrative that it's hard and that it's tough and that we've got all of these challenges. It's like, well, yes, we do, but how about let's look at it in a new light. Let's challenge the status quo. Let's look at opportunities for improvement and things, because it's all very well kind of saying that we've got all these challenges, but it's not actually going to help anyone by complaining about things, which is a truism in life just as much as it is in the as it is in the care sector. So I completely agree with you from that perspective. So what's your vision for Care England?
Well, I would like Care England to be the go-to representative body for everybody in the sector, not only those people in government, but also for our colleagues who are delivering care. We have a very large membership, but I want to expand and develop that. People always see us as the organisation that represents large corporates, and in fact we do represent pretty much all the large corporates and a lot of large charities, but we also have a very sizable number of small providers members in our membership. And I want to encourage everybody, particularly everybody who's having a hard time, to join Care England. Not only will you get all our information, which will be helpful to you, you'll get our lobbying, but also we've got a range of things that can save you money. And the bottom line is so important in our sector. And if you join us, you will more than save your admission fee. If you start using some of the deals that we have within our organisation.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's one of those things, as you say, kind of managing one's cost base is always going to be important, not least in the care sector. And I guess the conference would probably be an ideal environment for people to engage with that. So remind me, what date is the conference?
The conference is on the 13th of November, and it's taking place at Church House, which is in central London.
Sure.
And we've not only got a great lineup of speakers, but also we've got lots of people in our exhibition who supply things to the sector. And so it's a good opportunity for people to go and meet with people who can make their businesses more efficient and can deliver some services that will save them money and give them the edge when it comes to their competition. So not only is it about some of the big policy issues, but there's some really interesting practical things. We also have a series of workshops which help people to think through what they're doing in relation to some of the workforce issues, and think how can they improve their offering to potential staff.
And I think that's it, isn't it? It's they say that you should make your employee your first customer. The more that you can do to train, to be able to enable, to be able to empower your team, whether that be kind of your operational team or your frontline workforce, ultimately that's going to drive in better care. We touched upon culture a little bit, and we'll come on to that in a little while. But having that open-minded culture where you're looking for opportunities again to improve and to be able to innovate and to drive efficiencies and things like that, ultimately it's going to benefit not just the team, but the residents, and the overall impact to the organisation as well should be quite sizable as well. So, so a little bit of a change of gear, but we are obviously experiencing worrying times from a political perspective, from an economical perspective, and probably from a handful of other perspectives as well. What's your view on the state of play as it stands?
Well, it's chaos, and honestly there is no other word to describe it. There is chaos in every part of government, and also we haven't got coherency in any of the opposition parties. And one of the things that's happened in social care over the last 20 years is we have been failed by successive governments. Now that leads me to believe we shouldn't wait for them to come up with the answer. We've got to craft the answer for ourselves. We've got to be clear about what we deliver. We've got to be really communicative with our service users, their families, with local communities about the importance of what we do. We've got to also embrace technology, because that will be a way of improving the quality of service, but it will also be a way of improving efficiency. If you look at the demographics, we are going to face significant increased need, and we certainly won't be getting anything like the amount of extra resources that we require. So that leads me to believe we're going to have to work smarter, not harder. So our challenge to the sector is to think strategically about how you flex your model so that you can deliver really high quality care, but do it in the most efficient and effective way and make a sustainable business.
Yeah, what you've just said there, I completely agree with, and there's a maxim that we try and instill into our clients and the people that we kind of engage with it within SP&P, and that's asking the question: okay, so are you going to let what's happening in the market dictate what happens in your business, or are you going to do what it takes to making your business dictate what goes on in the market? And I think it's again, it's a case of taking ownership. To your point, is the government going to come in and fix all of our problems? Don't think so. So what do you need to do about that? Again, take ownership for what the things that you can within your kind of sphere of influence, and ultimately that's your business, that's your team, that's your organisation, whatever that might be, and we all need to contribute our bit towards making that happen and shaping the sector so that it goes in the right direction. So, as a sector, what do you think that we do well, and where do you think that we can improve?
Well, I think we do the delivery of really high quality personalised care really well. I think we do flexibility really well, and I think that's something which isn't understood. When I go into, for example, care homes or indeed domiciliary care services, I see members of staff who are constantly connecting with the people they support and flexing and changing what they do to be more appropriate to their needs. I think we also do things extremely well in terms of the efficiency of our sector. So if you look at what we deliver and you look at the way in which we deliver it on really, really poor levels of resources in many cases, it shows that we're very innovative and very flexible. So I think we do that well. So I think there's a lot that this sector can champion. I think also we do a lot of stuff which is health related really well. So if you look at everybody who's in a care service, predominantly they're there because they've got a health condition.
Absolutely.
And care services are making those people's health conditions manageable for them, and they're enabling them to live a life despite the fact they might have lots of different health conditions. So I think we do complexity really well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And do you think, what do you think about you touched upon this slightly there, but what do you think about the integration between the healthcare world and the social care world?
Well, I think the first thing I want to do is reclaim the term integration. Frankly, I'm sick of talking about integration and it being talked about in terms of the NHS, local authorities, and sometimes care providers.
Sure.
That misses the point.
Yeah.
Real integration is how people experience a service. So a good example is when I get on an aeroplane, I go to an airport, it's owned by one company, I check in and somebody's checking me in, works for another company. I get on an aeroplane owned by another company. I sit in my seat and I do not know when I leave Austrian airspace and go into German airspace. There's a massive change going on in the background, but all I experience is a flight from A to B.
Yep.
And that is how we should judge integration. When the person who uses the service knows they've got what they need at the appropriate time of the highest quality, but they're not sure who's delivered it, when we've reached that, we'll have reached an integrated system.
That's a great analogy. I really like that. Yeah, okay. And how can we improve the image of social care?
I think one of the things we've got to do is we've all got to be ambassadors for social care. Every single person who works in social care, everybody who is either supported by it or has a relative supported by it, needs to get out there and start telling everybody how wonderful social care is. People who always do it in the NHS. You know, you meet people and they're proud to tell you that they're a care worker in a hospital. I don't necessarily see care workers in residential care similarly telling people what they do and explaining how important their role is. So I think we've got to start with ourselves. We've also got to encourage the media to give a better and more balanced view. So I talked about the care home for 4-year-olds. You talked about the fantastic restaurant that makes mistakes. These are opportunities to showcase both how people's lives are changed by condition, but also what a difference good social care makes. So I think we've got to do some of that. We've also got to get politicians to talk up social care. They're happy to stand and talk endlessly about the NHS. Well, they called themselves the Department of Health and Social Care, so I expect to see them eulogising about social care.
Where do you think, where does the problem lie? Why does the government only really lean towards the healthcare end of the spectrum rather than the social care spectrum?
Well, I think it's very historic, and of course part of the issue is when the health service was set up, it was absolutely groundbreaking and paradigm shifting, and it took away a lot of fear from people. It was also very much a situation where when you had a health condition, you were diagnosed and you were either cured or you just died. So what people associated health service with was getting back to normal.
Yep.
They don't associate social care services with that because, of course, we deal with people who have long-term conditions.
Sure.
We are not going to be able to cure people who may be living with dementia or have diabetes or have some serious issues like arthritis, etc. So I think partly it's a historic thing, and of course we've had also 60 years, 70 years of propaganda about how wonderful the health service is, and so we are starting from a very different place. But I think we shouldn't say we can't do it. I think we should just get ourselves really clear that we all need to be bigging up social care, telling people what it does, and really showing them the impact it has on people's lives.
It's probably a good segue to talk about the care badge. It's probably a good opportunity. So tell me, so how did the whole idea come about, if you like?
Well, I gave a speech at the King's Fund, and one of the things that I did was I noted that the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care was always wearing an NHS badge. And I mused on what would happen if the Secretary of State for Transport wore a Virgin Train badge. People would say they were favouring one part of their portfolio. Now, when I came off the stage, Robin Batchelor came over to me and he said, that's something we need to grasp. We need to have a social care badge. And Robin being Robin, he just grabbed a hold of the situation. By the end of the week, he'd got mock-up badges. He had then, by the middle of the next week, formed a public interest company. He then also exhorted me to send emails to the ministers and tell them what we were trying to do. We got our colleagues from NCF, from UKHCA also involved, and it really took off. But I have to say it took off by the energy of Robin Batchelor, who is just a can-do person. And because he decided we were going to have this badge, he really went for it. We are now in the position where we have distributed over 90,000 of these badges.
That's just tremendous.
In the space of a few weeks, and it is only a few weeks. And it really gives people an opportunity to say, I have a commitment to care, to be proud of working in care, to wear with pride a care badge, just in the same way that staff in the NHS wear with pride their NHS badges.
That segues beautifully into what I was going to talk about next, and that's how do we get more young people into care? Because that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is that professionalism thing, and it's making people proud to want to be a carer. And I think largely the people that work in care, they're immensely proud of what they do. But again, because of that public perception thing, the people that don't work in care, maybe it's just not as appealing as it might be. So yeah, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think first of all we need to start getting out the fact that care is probably one of the few things in this economy that will give you a job for life. Yes. If you look at the demographics, you can see you can build a career in care. And I think we should also start reminding people that this is not a job, it is a career. And there is a really good career pathway in care. We should also remind them that it's not only about the delivery of direct services, but there are a multiplicity of things you can do in the care sector to build and develop a career. There's also really good opportunities to specialise in particular areas, so you can find yourself first of all interested in one particular area and then specialising and becoming very, very much your focus of your career being one particular area of our sector. So our sector is diverse. It's got lots of different roles. It's a job for life. It's a job that gives you immense satisfaction. You can really see the impact of your work. And those are the messages we need to get out to people. And we need to remind people this is not a job, it's a career. Absolutely. And we need it from the very start in schools for people to be understanding that.
It's sowing that seed at an early age, isn't it, to see that there is that real career progression there. There was, forgive me, I forget the lady's name, but there was a lady who wrote a beautiful blog on LinkedIn, basically just saying the journey that she'd gone from being a frontline carer and starting some I think 16 or 18 years ago, and now she's the managing director of a fantastic home care business. It's the journey's there. It happens. It's the real world, and I think people. I'm sure part of the reason behind her motivation for wanting to write that was just to say, look, there is a career path here, and it is a fantastic one as well, of course.
Yeah. And you know, it's one of the things that we need to do more of, these success stories. So I was talking recently to somebody who started her life in care mainly because she was told that she wouldn't get another job, and she was then nurtured and supported by her employer. She has gone right the way through to having a PhD. This was somebody who was told that she was not particularly good when she was at school. She's now managing a big service. This is a really good success story. And I have to say, I see loads of those success stories. But what we don't do in this sector is get them out there. So I think one of the things we should start doing is far more identifying people who've made really good careers in care, that have high levels of satisfaction, doing great jobs, making an impact, and those are the exemplars we need to put in front of younger people.
What I'm going to do off the back of this conversation is to be able to try and connect with some of these people who have undergone that journey, so that we can create a podcast about it, just as a little contribution towards trying to shift that narrative. And you may have people that you'd like to be able to introduce to have that discussion.
Certainly.
Maybe we could do like a panel debate or something along those lines. But I think everything that we do to contribute towards improving the perception of care, it's as a whole, but then also from kind of an employment brand perspective, and the opportunities that lie within it, I think are really, really important.
I agree, and we need to get those role models out there, because in every other sector, whether it's people who are in sport or in some of the businesses, there are role models that people look up to and think, I want to be like that person. Well, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of role models in care, and we could be putting their stories out there as well.
Without a shadow of a doubt, I'm going to make this happen. Let's get some of these guys and put them up on a bit of a podium so that they can share their journey and their what got them from where they've started to where they are now. I think that'll be a lot of fun. We'll have to have a conversation about that offline about making that happen. But yeah, no, very, very happy to do that. What would you like to see change in the future from the perspective of the whole sector? Where would you like to see kind of the positive improvements, if you like?
Well, I'd like us to see the sector become more innovative, more creative, embracing technology, also sometimes flexing their models. So, for example, I'd like to see more residential care providers delivering some support services to local communities, perhaps some day services, night support services, more respite care. That will be great for local communities, but it will also create a pipeline of people who want to use those services. And one of the things that I think often happens is people go into particularly residential care at a point of crisis. They've never had a connection with it before. Well, if they're used to that service, if they know that service in their local area, the transition will be so much easier for them and for the care provider. So I think that's what we've got to do, start embracing new models of care and also more flexible approaches to using our resources, not only for the people we support in our services, but also for the people who are in communities who we could also support.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. A good friend of mine, Adam Hutchison, is a big fan of that model. I know he's doing quite a lot of work to drive towards that. The care home being part of the epicenter of a community, and then being able to deliver the various different iterations of care. You mentioned, of course, about the kind of the care pathway kind of starting with some type of disaster, and then that person never having had any kind of experience of the brand, the organisation, and that makes moving into a care home far more stressful than it might be. If you're engaged within the community and you've already provided some service, whether that to be to the person who ends up moving in or to somebody within their kind of friendship or network group, if you like, that it takes away some at least of the pressure. Moving house is stressful anyway. It doesn't matter whether you're 17 or 70. It's always going to be a tough gig. But doing things that can improve that care pathway is always going to be important. And I think it makes good commercial sense as well, because it's an opportunity to be able to engage with a community. There's ways to make it work. So being flexible, I think, is very, very important. And I think hopefully that's, well, fingers crossed, that's something that people will begin to adopt on a mass market basis. So. One thing that we've talked about quite on a number of different occasions this morning, being an example of it, but we've talked about culture in the care sector. How important do you think culture is for the care sector?
Oh, I think it's absolutely vital. I think it's one of the most important things. We've got to get the culture right, because actually if you get the culture right, you get everything right. So if you get the culture of openness and dignity and respect within a staff team, that will translate to how you support the people that you're working with. So I think one of the things we need to do is to be really clear about our values, really clear about developing open cultures, and then also measuring what a difference that makes, so that people really understand why you should create those open cultures.
Yeah, we're a massive advocate of within supporting our clients at SP&P to be able to develop their culture, to be able to design it, to be able to kind of steer it in the right direction. I use the analogy of an operating system for your people. So if you didn't have an application and operating system for a PC, it's just ultimately it's a piece of hardware. It's got no direction. It has no operating system. So being able to set up an operating system for your people. One of the, to summarise, we always say that it helps operators to be able to act with more speed, resilience, and agility. But ultimately, if you're running a care business, it doesn't matter what type of organisation we're talking about now, but you're always going to experience pressure. There are always going to be challenges. If you have a well-aligned team that are striving to achieve your vision and your intent for your organisation, where everyone's, I guess the colloquialism is to be on the same page and pulling in the same direction.
Absolutely.
It's not like you're not going to experience those challenges, but people are going to be better geared up to be able to address them. So we're very much of the opinion that probably 90% of the challenges within a care business derive from people problems. So it's getting the operating system for your people right has just a huge impact on any service.
I agree.
From the perspective of the team themselves, the residents, and then obviously for the wider organisation itself. So yeah, I'm glad they're on the same page on that one,
Definitely
Martin.
we are.
What have been your biggest leadership lessons in your career?
Oh, I think one of my biggest leadership lessons was not to think that I was the only person who had the solution. And it was very interesting. It was at a time many years ago when I worked in Lambeth, when I was closing day centres, and I was talking to everybody from the perspective of what I thought the solution was. It was always motivated by trying to do the best in a difficult situation. But when I started to talk to the people who were actually in the day centres and their families, we crafted a much better solution, which was much cheaper and delivered what they needed. But I had a long period of time before I actually opened my mind to the fact that there were other people out there who had better solutions than the one that was sitting at the end of my desk.
And what was that? What caused that turning point, do you think? What was the inflection point?
I think it was that I had been at a particularly long meeting. We guillotined at midnight, and when I came out of the town hall, I was stood next to two people on the steps who were absolutely opposed to me. But we just said, oh, what a long night that was. And one of them said, why don't we just sit down tomorrow outside all this and think about what we could possibly do to reach a compromise. And when we finally got sat down and we started to realize that we both wanted the same things, they were articulated in different ways, but we both wanted the same things. And when we started to work backwards from what we were trying to achieve, rather than trying to say, how do we reconfigure what we've got, we then were in a much better position. And it was a really great moment for me, because I realized that actually it wasn't about people taking different positions. We actually wanted the same thing, which was good quality services for older people with dementia in that borough. And we had got ourselves locked into being in conflict rather than thinking, well, how do we work together?
Yeah, I think that's a great leadership lesson to share, and I think that's one thing that the world needs more of: effective discourse, more people sitting around tables and saying to each other, how do we work together better, and how can we create compromise, rather than, again, this kind of loggerheads type. And I think that's probably one of the reasons for our political circumstances and probably many other sets of circumstances, because wouldn't it be great for just people to maybe leave their ego at the door and focus on the solutions rather than the problems themselves. So,
and another really important management lesson I learnt was that don't take responsibility for the things that are not your fault. Work on the things that you can change, and then work round the things that you can't change. And that was a really important lesson that I learnt very early.
And where did that lesson come from?
Well, it came from the issue about closing services in a time of cuts, when I suddenly was trying to take responsibility for having made the cut, and actually it wasn't my cut.
Sure.
It had been made by a politician, and I shifted the responsibility back to the politician because the politician was outrageously trying to devolve the responsibility for the people who had to do her dirty work when she had made a decision to cut the budget.
Got you.
And then suddenly when you said, I will do what I have to do operationally, but what people need to know is this is happening because of your decision, not because of my decision.
Sure.
And then what we did was we got a lot of older people into a council meeting, and we confronted her with that. And we said to her, you are the person responsible. And what was interesting, she changed the decision.
Oh, wow.
But we didn't change what we did in response to the cuts, because by that time we'd realised the services needed to be reconfigured.
Sure.
They needed to be changed. So what we did was we were able to change them with slightly more money.
Got you. So in actual fact, there was a net gain of the set of circumstances, albeit it started out in something that seemed quite negative. So that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. If you had one piece of advice for somebody looking to make a positive impact on the care sector, what would that piece of advice be?
I think start with the people you're trying to support, and don't think that you know what they want. Listen to them, ask them what they want, and also ask them how to get there. We don't necessarily have all the answers, and sometimes if you ask people to give their thoughts, they come up with some really great ideas. Also, I would say don't take everything on yourself. So if there is a problem, share that problem, because there might be somebody out there who can find the solution to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting that you mentioned kind of talking to the experts. So I did an episode with Caroline Baker from Barchester quite recently, who's their director of dementia care, and she said, what we need to do is we need to spend more time listening to the experts, and that's not the people in operations, that's not the people that have got all the qualifications, it's the people living with dementia themselves to go and work out. So what can we do better? How can we improve? What can we do more to support you wherever you are in your life's journey? So sounds like you've got a very similar perspective there.
Exactly, and I think Caroline's absolutely right. Let's start with the people that we're trying to support, and let's try and find out what they want rather than imposing what we want on them. Absolutely,
great piece of advice. And what's the best piece of advice that you've been given personally?
I think the best piece of advice I was given, which was not very well received by me when it was given, was that I should play to my strengths, and I was in a job at the time that was playing to my weaknesses.
Okay.
And a great conversation was started by my boss when she said to me, undoubtedly you have many skills, but they're not matched to this job. But then she very helpfully told me what she thought my skills were, and that made me move into a completely different type of career.
Okay.
And if she hadn't given me that advice, which I didn't like hearing at the time, my life would have gone in a very different direction, and I believe I would have been probably moving up the ladder in a bureaucratic job that I wasn't particularly good at and that I didn't like. And she gave me the advice to go into things that were about people and policy, and that has been where I've developed my career, and it's been a fantastic career, and I've been so lucky in the opportunities that I've had, and I've enjoyed every single job I've had. Some of them have been very different, some of them have been very challenging, but they've all been very satisfying.
I think that's a great piece of advice, and often it's the piece of advice that you least like, which is going to be the one that if you listen to, that's going to make the biggest impact. So, Professor Martin Green, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the Care Home Show.
Thanks very much, Simon.
You're very welcome.
Thanks.